All right. Good afternoon. Today is December 30th, 2022. This is UNET TV. My name is Kemal Erkan. This is our weekly event, and I'm here with Sean Dunnigan. Sean, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Kemal, how are you?
Good. So we are going to cover our, as usual, topics with the global events, U.S. economy, and of course, today we have the continuation of our discussion that we started last week with the climate change as part of the global events. And also we are going to cover the COVID updates as we have some new developments are happening from COVID. So we can start with the COVID updates. And here's our first video for today.
All right. Yep. So as you mentioned, we're going to begin with our COVID updates. This week, not focusing too much on the number-wise, as opposed to the policies and regulations that were just recently put into effect. So one of the announcements that was released earlier this week is that the U.S. is now putting restrictions on those passengers and travelers coming in from China, requiring them to be tested negative for COVID in order to come back into the country. And that was released, I believe, just on Wednesday that they announced that. So fairly recent. And
it's signed.
Yeah. So
well, it's effective now, right?
Yeah. So earlier in the week, like Monday or Tuesday, they were anticipating what type of measures they were going to actually have to take. But now it's actually official. So that will be requiring negative tests to re-enter from China. And then just another article relating to that, just to mention flashback to 2020, 2021, when the whole pandemic was initially starting. We do have the article just on how Biden is now regulating the travel from China after previously calling Trump during those debates xenophobic for isolating one particular area on where we think that the high rates of infection and spread are coming from. So just a little bit of like hypocrisy right there on that item, but we are just
we're confused to that by now.
Yeah, so it's ever changing. It seems like people's stances on certain situations, but that is the official announcement. So at least for China, an area that's high in infections, a lot of cases recently, and actually on that we do have numbers that it looked like their one-day total was over 34 million positive tests, which they released that they're actually going to stop counting and stop doing the test. It was
stop reporting.
Yeah, I should say stop reporting on that. So it was such a high influx on their one-day total. And this is, just to keep everyone in mind, recently they did have their zero COVID policy that they kind of withdrew some of the restrictions back in early December. So not a surprise that you're seeing this high influx now as we're in late December. A couple of weeks later, it's kind of that ripple effect of them repealing some of their restrictions. So as we know, China has been pretty harsh on their COVID restrictions, their COVID zero policy. So interesting to see what's going to unfold with this new surge and the fact that we already have the U.S. putting restrictions on travel wise, at least from China.
So well, part of the issue with this, again, since we started doing these sessions, it's almost like, well, we know what's coming. Sometimes the writing is on the wall, and we choose to either pay attention or not. So, and again, in this one, I think we are still a little bit late. So China was actually communicating what's happening in their country, maybe not from their formal channels, but they were communicating with all these videos that was almost unreal. And we had discussed those videos and why they were actually panicking. And then now we know that that's because there's a huge rate of infection, and one day of 37 million. That's, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 35% of what France or Germany has for the entire time.
Yeah, total.
So that means this is not going to stay in China. So it's going to come out. We knew this. We knew what was happening there in the last 3, 4, 5 weeks. But taking the travel restriction decision now is another late decision, in my opinion.
I would agree.
And we keep bringing these up, but I guess we are not the decision makers or the policy makers or whatever or not old enough to be in the government.
Yeah, just a spectator for now.
Right. So yeah, so we'll see how this is gonna change what's happening in other part of the world. Now, one other thing that I'm worried about is the traveling that's coming. It's going to come from China just because of their New Year is different, and that's going to actually increase the number of people who are traveling. So I think we are all going to pay for these decisions, late decisions, and whatever you want to call them.
And then just one other thing just to add on that too is, as we're seeing, like we know we had the different variants, we had Omicron back in the winter, Delta variant. So just to keep in the back of our minds, kind of how or what needs to be done now to prevent, again, like another surge. Like if we saw these variants, years ago, and now there's a surge of 37 million cases in China. Like, is it, as you're saying, is it the vaccine isn't working? Is it there's new variants? Is it the protocols that are being followed or not followed in certain areas? Like, what are we going to do now to try to prevent another relapse again?
Well, I mean, the travel restriction, not the restriction necessarily, but asking for people to have their COVID vaccine or negative tests, especially with those suspected countries, it's an easy thing to do. And if why would we have to really worry about testing at this point if we know that the risk is really high? So the test is easy. I mean, I'm going to travel in a couple of weeks, and I have zero problem going and getting tested if this is going to save other people's lives. And also, like, you don't want to infect your own family. Right. So I mean, I'm going to be with my parents and two elderlies. So the least thing that I want to do is to risk their lives. So it shouldn't be a big deal, and we shouldn't really make these decisions too late. And we were kind of alone in this when we were saying that, look, there's something happening. It's not just some crazy Chinese government. People are torturing their people. It's more than that.
There's a reason behind.
They are scared of something happening, and that's why maybe they kind of lost control over the way that they're enforcing these rules. And that's what I believe is happening now. But at least now we know what's happening.
Exactly.
So now, where do we want to go next?
So we are going to be following up on the climate change topic that we had last week. Some of the subtopics within climate change as a whole that we had, we were kind of touching a little bit on the Congo mining and the unethical practices that are behind that and relate to how that corresponds with the electric vehicles, electric batteries, and then in turn the impact on the climate.
I think last week when I brought to Congo, like it was kind of, I did blindside with that. So do you want to actually, is that the number?
Right? Yeah, so this video we have displaying right now, we're just showing some of the reporting on. So we know that we talked about cobalt specifically, but also lithium is one of those mineral elements that are being mined that are used heavily in these electric batteries to power, whether it's electric vehicles, which seems to be the most popular use of it, but there are other devices like your phones, for example, that require these types of resources to be gathered. And what we're showing here is just, so right now we have the Congo on the screen, but as you mentioned, their population almost 100 million. And the fact that these people who are mining these resources are living in extreme poverty. So we're saying it's about $1, $2 a day that they're making. And it's actually artisanal mining, which means that they're not using modern day technology machines or tools that can help them in a safe manner, in a more effective, more efficient manner. So obviously if they're down there with, old school picks and hand tools, hand shovels, trying to get these resources out of the earth, a lot more dangerous. We know that the things that they're breathing in, very toxic to them. They're not wearing proper protection, whether, it's in flip-flops mining these resources or not having proper face gear that they're breathing in these toxic things. And the one thing
I think that part of the issue is, like, do we even care?
Well, that's what you were kind of saying last week, that a lot of people aren't even aware, and if they are, they kind of just think, I guess somebody's handling it or regulating
Kim
it.
Kardashian gives a shit about like what's happening in Congo.
Right.
Right.
So, and I think another thing is,
I mean, she wants to work on her own video, but not for Congo.
right. Okay. So one of the things is that in a first world country where you're so used to having the latest device, the newest car, and people maybe, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I would assume it's a safe assumption that we are overusing some of these resources, and that's why means of this drastic measures are being taken to actually have forced child labor, almost slavery in a sense, to get these resources to be able to keep up with demands. And I know doing some of the research that the Congo itself is responsible for almost 75% of the needed cobalt for these devices. So there are sustainable cobalt mines that do exist in the world, but what they produce is nothing near what's needed to keep up with the demand that we're seeing in modern.
Use where it's less, a lot less expensive, and then come back and then sell it for really high.
It's being exploited.
High amounts, right? Yeah. So that's what we are really good at, I guess.
Right.
When I say we, I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about the entire world. Yeah. So the hypocrisy and double standards, and like when you are able to get, just like if you think about this, having a border with another country doesn't mean that you are totally isolated from that, right? It's just the border is not even real. So this is something that's, although now it's becoming more real with the walls and everything, maybe it's necessary, but how do you actually separate something like natural disaster when you are in the Mexican Bay, right?
Yeah, Gulf of Mexico.
Gulf Bay. So then between, is there a difference from this side of the border versus the other side of the border? We don't. So, and if we don't, then these responsibilities needs to be taken more seriously and timely, because what's happening on the other side is going to come to us very soon. Yeah. Right. Now we enjoy all of these really fancy stuff that's costing us nothing, and we pay a lot of money to get it here, and someone is becoming really rich out of that.
Correct. Yeah. So the cost, you're saying financially, also compared to the cost to like healthcare and what the people are being exploited, are totally mismatched on what we're receiving, say in a modern first world country. And you're saying exploiting some of these other countries, like their cost, we, like you're saying, like Kim Kardashian, like we probably wouldn't see that day to day, but down the line, like it's coming from somewhere. And how are these companies able to profit on it if they're paying top-notch dollar for it to be sustainably mined with $1 million machines? In fact, their profit margins would just be way off. So
and also like the conditions, again, we are talking about the country of Congo is 110 million population. It's not some small, it doesn't matter if it's small, but it's this, so many people are going through this torture. Now, then we talk about like the reason we are actually, this is part of our subtopic, is under the climate change, when we are trying to make things so difficult and so costly, then we're not really caring about other things if it's not in our region.
Yeah, that's a big thing in terms of infrastructure too, where they say, I think the term is as long as it's not in my backyard type thing. So if you're not seeing the immediate impact or devastation or whatever the cost may necessarily be right here in your immediate vicinity, the fact that it's being exploited from elsewhere.
So this battery is not only used for the phone, but also it's used for the electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So any electric vehicles.
Yeah. So that's kind of why we're tying this in, like you're mentioning on, we're kind of going from the source on, let's see how it's being gathered, these resources for electric vehicles, because our overarching topic, just to remind everyone, is the climate change and kind of the impact that we're seeing. And we'll touch on it later when we get to the financial aspect on the bill, on the Omnibus, on what they're doing with the climate change budget part. But we're kind of going from the source on, we're seeing that there's, child labor being exploited to gather these resources. And now the idea that I say most Americans, most people in modern first world countries they're assuming that electric vehicles are somehow better for the environment, and that by, buying and using these and we're not even talking about phones, this is just electric vehicles right now, but both do require these lithium and cobalt to run their electric batteries. But at least on the climate change aspect, electric vehicles, the Americans have this idea that if they're using an electric car, they're not contributing to any CO2 emissions, and that's way better for the environment, and we're going green. But a lot of misconceptions around this are, the CO2 that's being burned in the factories, like oil is what these giant dump truck machines use to pull the resources out of these mines. There's no electric giant dump truck pulling the stuff. So
but we don't see it, so it's okay.
Yeah. So what they think is, because my muffler on my, electric car here isn't releasing the CO2 the same as a combustion engine, I must be doing better. But you're not realizing like the amount of pollution, CO2 that was already created just to make and manufacture your lithium battery is already like tenfold of what the combustion engine car would have released through its exhaust pipe throughout the duration of the car. And I think somewhere I read or heard in one of the videos that for these electric cars, until they reach 100,000 miles, their impact on the environment isn't really even seen on their emissions. So you'd have to have these electric cars for so long for their benefit, how small it is to actually make an impact versus standard combustion engine car.
True, and we're not saying that we should do this or that, but it cannot be like all electric or all this or all that. So it has to be, there has to be a proper moderation of how we are utilizing certain things, and also like understanding the actual impact. And I don't know if you want to go to the next on the population density yet, or
you can, or the electric vehicle one. The electric vehicle, as I'll talk as you can, I want to, as you're saying, the impact it's having. So, and in these statistics I'm looking at in some of the research videos I was doing, is even if, all people in the USA went to electric vehicles and, we stopped using that amount of oil that we do on combustion cars for, our daily commutes or whatever, that would only reduce the oil consumption by about 10%. So what people don't realize is that most of the oil that's used is in like airplanes, giant buses, tractor trailer type big rigs that are actually transporting all these other goods. So these are like the devices and machines that are using the majority of oil. Like think about an airplane, how much it uses to fly cross country and how many flights there are. So
I have this, you'll like this article. I mean, this chart, I didn't actually get through you, but so it says the richest British people use more energy flying than the poorest use overall. So the richest would be like 10%. So I'm gonna actually just show it to you guys this way to see if you're able to. So the chart on the top is the richest. The red part is the flying, and the one on the bottom is the entire population on the poor side. Their total consumption is less than what rich is spending for flying.
Yeah.
So this is why we are actually talking the way that we are, because it's not like there's some equal proportionate distribution or contribution to this issue. So people who are traveling with private jets, they are lecturing people for climate change, and then we want to better understand climate change. So which takes us to our next point of understanding why climate change is actually bad, because there's part of the climate change is something that we are not able to change. Right. I mean, there's some impact we can, but there's a big impact. There's a big part of it that we cannot make any impact. So now we were trying to get this ready for last week. Density, population density. This is important. So if we don't understand this, then we are not going to be able to really see the overall end result of the climate change, or how we can actually eliminate some of the end result of climate change. But you were saying something.
Yeah. So what we have here with our population density, we began as these visuals you're seeing is at least specific to the US. So I know we touched on Florida and how the coasts, like you mentioned down in Miami, where it's so heavily concentrated with the population. However, and you touched on this earlier too, think about the Gulf of Mexico and the southern US down there, when they're with our oceans and all the tropical storms and hurricanes that you're seeing that are hitting down there. It's always the coast that is obviously going to see the brunt of this damage. Sometimes these tropical storms and hurricanes do make it inland, and there's still damage associated with these high winds. And of course, we're not saying nothing happens, but the brunt of these are always felt around the coast right there. And as we're mentioning, with this population density and how it's kind of spread out. And last week, you even touched on this too, how certain regulations are put in place. How you mentioned the example here of the buildings on the lots here, where you can only build, you said 2-story, I think 2 or 3-story max, and that's it. No one's going to say, oh, do whatever you please, even if it's not sustainable and it's really risky, just go for it. But we're seeing that some of the regulations are either not being enforced in some of these areas, or the regulations are just, lack of better words, like way off in what they should be for that particular area. So
why are they letting these things to happen? Is like, I think our struggle is. So let's just remind everyone that what we were kind of discussing now, because this is not our specialty. We are knowledgeable on this issue, just like anyone else. This was maybe until the last couple of weeks, but when we decided to talk about it, the reason we did is because this is going to become part of the budget and our expenditures. Therefore, it's going to become part of our taxes and how taxes are being spent. Also, our personal expenses and business expenses based on the regulations that's going to change around the climate change. So therefore, we kind of needed to not only understand, but also want to have some say in this. So, and we've been doing a lot of learning, research, and we, as we mentioned last week, we already reached out to some profs at UD and from UPenn, and the government agency also will be probably joining us at some point regarding this topic. But let me just actually give you guys some numbers. So I think one of the things that what climate change is and how it impacts everyone, if we were to kind of put it under that topic. So India, since 1960, population went up by 210%. Now, let's put it in perspective what that 210, they were at 450 million, and today they are at 1.410 million. So what their base number was now becoming, that become their fracture of their 2 billion. So they grew about 1 billion. Okay. Now let's go to Pakistan. Pakistan went up by 400%. So they were 45 million. They're at 225 million. So they grew about 180 million. So that's 400%. This is happening in the last 50 years. And so then I don't get prejudice jokes from my friends. So Turkey went up by 220%. So they went from 27 million to 87 million. Now, in the top 2 countries in India and Pakistan that we mentioned, where the population is, this increased population is living and building, and how they actually process their lives is in the most risky areas before the climate change. So when someone is on a flood zone, the flood zone is not, it has nothing to do with the climate change in terms of when it started. So this always was happening. Right. So now when we are putting more vulnerable people in front of the flood, then there are more damage is happening. Now the increased population is related to the poverty. Well, again, because these are statistics and because I have a lot of friends from both countries, around the world, but we know India and Pakistan very well. One thing that we know is like India right now is one of the poorest in terms of the per capita. The access to resources, clean water and running water. Now, when the poverty is growing so fast, your damage of any type of flood or any type of natural disaster is going to kill more people.
Yeah.
It's going to take more homes down because the homes are not being built because it's built into poverty.
Yeah.
Right. So now, well, if you want to have anything, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, like the magnitude of the devastation that you're seeing is amplified that much more because, as you're mentioning, areas that are in such high population growth, like you're saying, it's clusters of impoverished people that are forced to, just by the means of they can't afford, I'd say a great home and a safe, great bedrock. They're building on like these riverbanks. You're saying the floods have happened. It's annual floods each year. Doesn't matter the climate. It's historically it's been happening. But one of the slides I did have here in this video, loop towards the end though, was just a little analogy of if you think about at one of the water parks, maybe that if you sit in the splash zone where it's known that the whales jump out of the pool in the splash zone. If you're in the splash zone, you should expect to get wet type thing. Whereas if you're building weak infrastructure in areas that are prone to hurricanes, tropical storms, flooding, you should expect to see that much more damage or likelihood of having damage as you're in a riskier spot as opposed to away from areas that
there was a video that we couldn't I couldn't get that to you earlier, but I'm going to try. Go ahead. So I was going to go to the issue in Florida being different. Now, just to give you the number so they can continue from that. From the early mid 40s, number of residents, homes, individual homes, that number went up by 16 times. So it was about 590,000. Now it's about 10,500,000, something around that. So that's 16 times more. Now, the situation in Florida is a little bit different, but in terms of who's going to pay for the damage and how we are going to deal with the damage, if the resources of the federal government or the state government is used, I mean, if you want to spend your money and then however you want to spend your money, as long as you don't ask from me, then you're fine. But if I'm going to pay your bad decisions, consequences, I have a problem with that. So now we don't have the poverty problem as much as we have in those other two regions, but we have still the same problem of the actual impact of the natural disaster that hurricane would be for Florida.
Right. So as you're saying, though, the Florida is a different example because if you think about some of these buildings that we're seeing down there on the coast of like these luxurious skyrise, high-rise apartment buildings, it's kind of being stacked one on top of another and totally overcramped coastline right there. That's obviously different compared to the riverbanks of, say, Pakistan and the floodplain. It's the same concept, but slightly different on the fact of this is like, we know that the Florida's population is increasing, and we know that people, a lot of people when they retire, they move to Florida. These people are not buying these luxurious sky rises on the coast that are worth, millions of dollars. And as you're mentioning, where you have the problem where if this bill that was just, that you're going to touch on it a little bit later, the Omnibus, but I believe it was 38 billion of it was dedicated towards relief for the southern states down there for natural disaster relief. So if these people are overcrowding into these areas, which we know are prone to seeing natural disasters, regardless of climate change, which if there's climate change happening and the storms are becoming more frequent, more powerful, regardless, it's still happening in the area that it's going to be hit. So the fact that they're overpopulating and kind of cramming and building like these giant structures in areas that are expected to be hit with natural disaster, it's kind of like you're gambling at that point, and who's going to have to pay for the relief, like you're saying, when it comes down to it. Now it's our taxes for 38 billion is for natural disaster relief in case something happens. Well,
and that's where our problem actually starts. So, I'm looking at this. I may be able to pull it here because let's see. All right, so give me a second. So I think I have it. Recent and this video. Okay. If I share the screen on this one, and by the way, this.
Yeah, I think as long as you're in code.
If Ian is or anyone from the office, someone is listening, I am about to. The battery is about to die. If someone can actually rescue me. Okay, so I'm going to be able to share the screen here. So let's see what happens. Oh, it's apparently disabled. So let's make sure that it is a co-host. All right. So I'm going to share that the video that we couldn't play. I'm able to actually share that. So the reason this is happening is because it's all these homes are built on the riverbank, right? So,
yeah, I mean, if you're much further inland, you're not going to be seeing, and if you do see it, it'd be much less frequently.
Yes. So that's the only reason this is happening. So let me see if I can find that other picture, other video that I took. Well, we were borrowing that. I didn't steal them. Did Anne hear me? All right, so this is the other video that I have. And we did an extension cord, please. So this is the other video where, again, who's suffering from these events are people who are in poverty and who are actually growing fastest.
Yeah,
in terms of population.
That's what you're saying, that it's people in extreme poverty too, where it's once any type of disaster hits, it's literally detrimental for them. So it's kind of like no chance of even a rebounding type, where you're seeing literally homes just being carried away.
So there may be one other picture, and that's this one. One other video actually I meant. So is it playing? Yes. Okay, so all right, so that's that's kind of how the damage actually is happening. And what we are trying to say is, so if the poorest population is growing their the most poverty is growing so fast, where are they building? Is they're building in the most risky areas of the natural disasters. So that's all we are trying to say. So then can we actually stop that? So, well, why not, right? So we can stop that. We can control that. Is it inexpensive to control that? Absolutely. So that is very much doable. And this other video is now playing. So here is, hopefully I can show it to people.
So we're seeing the Pakistan with the 72 districts flooded here. It looks like they're having the helicopter relief coming
in. So you can tell that I was just recording the screen.
Yeah.
So that again is what we are dealing with. So, and I have seen something like this in Turkey in one of the rural areas. The disaster was so big. It wasn't the flood was so bad. It's just like everyone built on the way of the flood.
So even if it's I wouldn't say a regular flood, but it doesn't have to be this ginormous, record-setting, never seen it once in a lifetime, hundreds of years, you've never seen something like this for that type of damage to actually be felt, is what we're saying.
Sure. And while we are saying this, one of the reminders that I need to give everyone is Paris Agreement. And I'm hoping that Jack Markell can join us at some point, because this is his specialty, because he's the US ambassador in Paris for OECD. And maybe we can get some information, but this is one of the costliest projects ever, and one of the most inefficient projects, because you have like 170 countries who have different regulations, different rules, and different policies. And now you're trying to actually get those people work together on something that has nothing to do with their own country, right?
Yeah, and to have a universal agreement, like you're saying, everyone has their different policies, different regulations, and the fact that even if they all did hit the benchmarks that were set in this agreement, that we saw that the impact would only be like 0.1% of what is theoretically needed for the climate change to be mitigated ideally. So kind of seems like it's not
effective.
Yeah, it's not.
So
always.
Now what we would like to do for the following weeks, hopefully a couple of these expertise in the area, the profs from UD or from Penn State, UPenn, or maybe Penn State. Maybe Alp can help us to get someone from Penn State. He was trying to help us with the extension cord. So now perhaps we can actually have more discussions and understand what's happening, because I don't believe that government officials understand this issue. It's not their expertise. I mean, trying to talk to Biden about these issues, I don't think he's in the best mental status to really process this. I mean, my dad is healthier than him, and then I wouldn't be able to convince my dad to do something different than what he wants to do. But there are more efficient ways to do things, and we don't want to pay more for everything that we have today. We want to be efficient and have the longevity of the work that we are doing, the life that we have. But this doesn't cost. This shouldn't be so expensive. Some high school kids leave her school and then travels like 7,000 miles and come to UN office and then educates people about how there we do X, Y, Z. The reason is because, well, you need to go to school, so you should be in school. I think your parents abuse you or whatever it is, but this shouldn't be her issue. This should be we are bigger than that. We should be able to approach this issue more professionally. Like the Gretas should be in school, then we should actually take care of these, because she can actually question her people for a lot of other things that they did in their past, including the slavery and other things. But the climate change, the cost of this shouldn't be on our shoulders. That's what we are trying to say. And that's why we want to better understand this.
And to kind of add to what you're saying there on letting the experts, the ones who study it, the professionals, come up maybe with the plan. So for example, I know California, their governor, they said they're going to ban the sale of all gas combustion engine cars by the year 2025, maybe coming in 2030. But still, even if that did happen, that wouldn't have it would have a very, very, very minuscule impact. But that's just the state of California. Even if all of America, like I mentioned earlier, if we all switched to electric vehicles, the majority of the oil and the CO2 on this climate change is from your airplanes, these giant freight trucks, buses, that type of thing. So by the governor of one state just saying everyone has to get an electric car, why is he just saying, why aren't we having the experts on? Well, here's actually the fact that wouldn't help. And what we actually need to do instead is let's implement this plan or this policy that will have an impact, and it's not going to cost anywhere as near as what, So like you're saying, put it in the experts.
Absolutely true. So we are gonna build on this discussion. So this is our second week on this, and I can tell in the next several weeks we are gonna talk about this more. Will we ever stop talking about it? I don't know, but we'll definitely talk about it and then get better information. Now we want to go to the U.S. economy. Now speaking of spending responsibly, so we have another very responsible bill that was just signed, and this is our Omnibus.
Yes. $1.7 trillion.
Congratulations! So you have a lot more taxes to pay in the next future, because this is why do we know that this is not going to work is because it's too expensive. Government should be smaller, not bigger. Bigger government is more taxes, not just more taxes for me, but for you as well. Like if I'm assuming that we are from different tax brackets, so everyone's going to pay more. This is also going to bring inflation with it. But what's interesting is how is this money is being spent. I'm not sure if you have that statistic in front of you.
I know when we're looking at the majority, so over, I think it's like 51% is going towards military funding.
So out of 1.7 trillion, 858 billion is defense funding, and which mainly is going to support the Ukraine.
Yeah, so I think they were getting quite a large chunk of that. That was kind of determined even before this, when Zelensky was coming over.
So for those who may not believe that we are in a war with Russia, you need to wake up. I think we are, whether we want it or not, we are, because we are doing it through another country. Maybe we got a lot better in time. So now we don't have to do it directly, but Ukraine is in a war, which we are supporting Ukraine big time. And I think that's going to cost us, but let's see. I think that guy in Ukraine, he's a charlatan, clueless guy, and going to put all of us in trouble. Now, there's again, the emergency disaster assistance is part of this bill. The electoral vote counting law, do you have the information on that one? So they are actually making some changes, which is in this bill. I don't know how costly that is or what they are actually changing. I wasn't able to get through that. I'm not sure if you have it, but the TikTok, so those.
I see that. I have the TikTok one here, how they're banning on at least government devices because the app is from China. China originated.
A lot of things are from China, but TikTok is actually targeted, and I never had TikTok, so I'm glad that they are closing it, hopefully. Right. Protection for pregnant workers, retirement saving enhancements, which most people do need, as the stock market is still very much 22 to 36% less than where we were before the war. Some funding for January 6th attack, and changes to Medicaid and other health programs. Now, what we did from that, we actually took the subtitles of what's for the healthcare agencies. So about 120 billion is going to the healthcare.
Correct.
So you would think that we would spend more money for healthcare, but we are not. So the war is more important right now. So the protection for pregnant and breastfeeding workers. So this is they are actually extending medical conditions, accommodate for medical conditions related to pregnancy or childbirth. So employees, I don't know if employers, not sure who's denying them, but
really
I don't think we were denying. So the extension for telehealth flexibility, this is important.
That's a big one for us,
And one of the issues that I have with this, this bill, the telehealth flexibility should be separated from everything else, because telehealth should be part of our day-to-day healthcare practices. It's as long as we have the right setup, and the policies and the rules are enforced properly, expectations are set properly, I think telehealth is a lifesaver. Like anyone in the flu season who are elderly, if they can do what they need to do over the video visit, they should not leave their homes and come to the doctor's offices which may have a lot of infection already in our waiting rooms, right?
That one seems like a no-brainer too. Like the positives associated with the telehealth, I mean, far outweigh any negatives if there are any on what you're saying. So as you mentioned, as long as the standard is upheld and the policies are followed and it's regulated, it's definitely a no-brainer in my opinion that its benefits are.
Yeah. And the other flexibilities such as expanding type of healthcare providers that could provide telehealth to include occupational and physical therapy and speech language pathologists, audiologists. So there's some again when we are extending these the expectation, the setup, the requirement must be the right one. So another one is the boost for mental health. I don't know how they're going to do this, but I think they're increasing the funding for children, maternal and veteran mental health and improving access to those individuals. And more time for hospital at home services. So this is hospital dependent, allow this because patients don't have to come to the hospital anymore. The new law extends the acute hospital care at home initiative through December 31st, 2024. Care at home services have gained grounded due to COVID capacity and other issues, blah, blah. So, and then changes to Medicaid rules and process. So this is also increasing the fundings and without the redetermination rules, the people can enroll. I think some of these are good, but remember, more government expense, meaning that we are going to deal with more taxes. So now this would be another moment of me just reminding you guys that I told you so, but I am telling you right now that we are going to pay more taxes.
Yeah.
Anything you want to know?
So you're saying, especially 1.7 trillion, like you're saying, the money's coming from somewhere. If not, they're printing more, there goes your inflation. So, feeling the impact one realm or another.
Well, we don't have to print anymore. We just need to make them available through the bank because no one is spending paper money. So that as long as the digital is telling you that this is how much money you have. So you don't need to base another paper,
not physically
printing all that. So these are what we have for today. So we are actually working on our next year schedule, bringing our guests from the state, from the institutions in nearby. Our clinical presentations will start, so we'll have once a month clinical presentations. Other than that, so I'm thinking we'll continue having our bariatric Friday, which we have in the next couple minutes. So if you're not late, so Dr. Erkan is probably waiting for me. But for the climate change, we want to make sure that we bring the experts so that they can actually really give us their part of what's happening and what should be happening. And also, if they have some impact on the decision makers and policymakers, maybe we can actually make an impact on those individuals. So those are the things that we have for today. This is our last event before the new year. So happy new year. So we'll be back next year.
That's right. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Bye-bye.